Greetings and welcome back to the No Channel. This is Bernadette Johnson. I'm also known as Keziah or Kizzy. And today I'm coming to you with a book commentary. And this is going to be an extended book commentary on the book titled The Sibyls, the First Prophetess of Mami Wada, The Theft of African Prophecy by the Catholic Church. Now, if you watched my last video, you would have seen that I mentioned this book in that video. But in case you haven't watched the video, I'll just give you a brief description of the book, The Sibyls, because it is a very, very interesting read. And this is just a screenshot of it. This is just from the Amazon website where you can see the title more clearly. So if you would like to order the book for yourself, and this is the author, Mama Zogby. So I just wanted to show you that. But before I go into the discussion of this book, I would first like to paint a picture for you. Now, for those of you who are African Americans, especially African American, but you can be African and you can be, anyone living in the African diaspora, whether you're in Europe, Asia, in the Caribbean, wherever. But, as long, this is for those of African descent. I would like to paint a picture for you before going into discussing this book. Those of you who are what is called woke, who are of the woke society, or the woke community, those of you who know the greatness of Black and African civilizations, even those of you who are aware of the Israelite heritage of African Americans and various tribes in Africa and those in the African diaspora. You are the ones that I'm speaking to, and I want to paint this picture for you. Now, for some, it may be a long time ago. For some, it may be new. But I just want you to try and remember your experiences during your journey and quest into what I call wokeness, so to speak, or your awakening is what I would like to call it as well. Remember, before your awakening, you would wonder why Black people were so downtrodden. Why were we always at the bottom? Why would it always look like we couldn't win? Why did it always look like the white people was at the top? It looked like they always had the upper hand no matter what we tried to do. You think about the Tulsa, the Little Africa, how the great community that Black people built in Tulsa, and how it got destroyed by a lot of white people who was jealous of the prosperity of that Black community. And it looked like every time we tried to build something, every time we advanced, we took one step forward, we took 5 steps back or 10 steps back. And then you look at the religious aspect. In a lot of churches, there was a white Jesus on the wall. So you saw the Messiah, God was white, Jesus was white. And then you look around you in society, the white people are on the top. So it was no wonder that we had a Black inferiority mindset and a white superiority mindset, because what we were exposed to. But this started working on you. And you was like, wait a minute. You read history, and then you see the atrocities that the European, the white man, the Caucasian man have committed against Black people and other people of color. And then you say, okay, what's wrong with these pictures? What's wrong with this picture? But yet, God is in His image. He's the chosen of God. Even after doing all what he's doing, he's the chosen of God. And I have to listen to him. I have to follow him. He's the image of God. Well, I mean, what about me? I mean, what purpose do I serve? Is my main purpose is just to be his slave? Am I to be a slave? I mean, the way things look like look like everything is in his favor. Look like God loves him more because he's bestowed all of this prosperity on him. And then you think about that, and of course, you will come to the conclusion that, okay, well, maybe he is better. Maybe he is superior. But then things start working on you, and you start doing research. And the more you research, the more you discover that that couldn't be further from the truth. You do more digging. Maybe you come across some documentaries, books on ancient African civilizations. You discover the greatness of Africa. You discover all of these great African civilizations, like with Egypt. Of course, Egypt was whitewashed. You were led to believe that the ancient Egyptians were not black. And then you find out that they actually were. And those of you who are the Israelite way, you find out that the chosen were actually people who looked like you. They were actually your ancestors. And then you think, oh my goodness. And that's when the light bulb comes on in your head. You realize that you're not inferior. That you actually came from greatness. You came from a great people. You were associated with great civilizations. Israel, Egypt, I meant to say, was very much, involved with each other. All these other, kingdoms, and that was mentioned even in the Bible, the nations, great nation, powerful nations, world ruling powers at the time, mentioned in the scriptures. A lot of these were black nations. And when you discover all of that, all what you were programmed with during your childhood, growing up, you have to start deprogramming yourself. Now, I know that was a long spiel, but keep in mind what I said as we go into discussing this book. Keep in mind your woke journey as we discuss this book. Okay, so as I said, this is a book commentary on the Sibyls, the first prophetess of Mamiwata, the theft of African prophecy by the Catholic Church. And before I go any further, I will allow, in case you don't know what Sibyls mean, here is a definition of Sibyl. This is according to the Merriam-Webster. The first entry is any of several prophetesses, usually accepted as 10 in number, and credited to widely separate parts of the ancient world, such as Babylonia, Egypt, Greece, and Italy. The second entry is a prophetess or a fortune teller. So, in other words, a Sibyl is a prophetess. Let's just keep it simple. Okay, so this book, The Sibyls. This book, I've heard about it when watching, it was an interview a brother did of Vicky Dillard. I think the YouTube channel was Black Magic. And he was interviewing Vicky Dillard. And those of you who watch my videos know I've mentioned Vicky Dillard in a few of my videos. But anyway, that's when I first heard about this book, The Sibyls. And I was very, intrigued by it. So I decided to, order it and read it for myself. So the general summary is it talks about it was a matriarchal order in Africa. These were like the ancient African mothers, prophetesses and priestesses. These women actually, had rulership in Africa, and not just Africa. It was all over the world. Many kings from other powerful nations world rulers actually consulted these great African matriarchs before they did anything, regarding war or whatever, any kind of decisions that they made, any major decisions they made, they consulted these African, great African mothers, these matriarchs. And honestly, during the golden age of these matriarchs, when these matriarchs were ruling, Africa thrived. That's when, when you read about these great African civilizations, Egypt, Sudan, Ethiopia, they might not have been called that at that time. But those are the names that we know these, these nations in Africa, these countries in Africa as. But you know that there were quite a few great civilizations in Africa. And it was when these matriarchs were in power that these Africans thrived. You had these great African kings ruling. That was because you also had that matriarchal order. And these women ruled for, according to this book, ruled for like around 6,000 years. But eventually, her rulership was usurped. And I'll go into detail, about, how her rulership was usurped. And then other nations and people, came in and, overtook Africa. And then that's when Africa was on a decline. And also, too, many of the other works and the writings and the oracles of these prophetesses were stolen by the Catholic Church and canonized. And a lot of what we read in the Bible, a lot of the passages, were actually the words of these Sibyls, these ancient African prophetesses. But they were not credited for these works. These Sibyls were known to heal, like the Messiah, Jesus or Yeshua or Yahusha, different people, different groups called him by different names. Like how he healed, we read about how he performed miracles. Well, these Sibyls are said to have formed the same miracle, and they walked this earth long before the Messiah did. So this is a very, very, interesting read. So that's just a general summary about this book, but there's so much more. But of course, I'm just giving you a brief synopsis, because now we're going to go more into it, and I'm going to be reading passages from the book, and then I'll be elaborating on those passages as I go along. Okay, so let's continue. Okay, and I had mentioned this in the previous video that you can actually find the Sibylline oracles in volume 1 of the Pseudepigrapha. And you can also read, where they talk about the origin of it and who do they think was the author of these Sibyls. Okay, so I just wanted to, that was in my previous video, but of course, some of you might not have watched that video, but I had also mentioned this in that video as well. Okay, so now I thought was an interesting line on the back cover of this book. And this is what it reads on the back cover. Now check this out. African women are the only women in the world whose ancient mothers were not born under the yoke of patriarchy. During ancient times, for the first 6,000 years, Africa was ruled by a powerful order of matriarchs. Now let that sink in. It said African women were the only women whose ancient mothers were not born under the yoke of patriarchy. And you wonder why Black women tend to stand apart from all the other quote unquote races, other races of women. It's like I don't know if anyone else feel this way, but I know I do. It's like the black woman, she just can't quite fit into this westernized society with other women. She can't fit in with other women of this westernized society. And this sentence, well, two sentences from the back cover may explain why. Because she's not originally designed to live in what we call just ultra, just a super patriarchal system. She was designed to live in a society where things were more balanced, not where just women just ruled over men. No. She was designed to live in a society where it was more balanced. So I just decided to share that little passage from the back cover of the book because I thought it was very interesting, and I thought it explained a lot of the role that black women or African women, our position in this present westernized, Europeanized society. Okay, so let's continue. Now this is in the forward section of the book. So that's why it's in lowercase, Roman numerals. So this is page lowercase v5. This is a quote from it. Say, it was under the theocratic governance of the Sibyls as queen mothers that African matriarchal culture reached its golden age of achievement in medicine, religion, astronomy, philosophy, law, architecture, music, art, and social sophistication. Now, I said that earlier. It was during when these matriarchs were in power. This is when Africa thrived. This was the golden age of Africa. You had African kings ruling. They thrived. This was when the black man ruled. This was when the black man was at the top. It may be hard to imagine when we see things as they are now, but this is when Africa ruled, when these matriarchs was in power. And in order to have, for instance, you had the patriarch on one side, the matriarch on the other side. It was like two wings of the same bird. So you have two wings have to be of the same strength for that bird to adequately fly. So you had to have that proper balance between the masculine and the feminine for civilization to truly thrive. As I said, truly thrive. You have to have that proper balance. So let's go to another quote. Now this is on page 27. It says this: from Mesopotamia to Libya to Mitzrayim, which is Kemet or Egypt, Ionia, Manoah, Peloponnese, that's Turkey, and Mycenae, which is Greece, and later Rome, the Sibyls were the primary divine, Vatican, and absolute moral authority. As I said, it wasn't just in Africa. It was all over, the known world that she wielded her power. And if you didn't watch my last video, she even ruled the Vatican, where the Pope sits today. That was originally her seat. The Vatican City was originally the seat of these African matriarchs, these prophetesses, these priestesses. Okay. And now this is back in the forward section. This is Roman numeral 3. And this is a quote from that page. Considering the current status of African women around the world, one could hardly be convinced that her matriarchal presence and the enormous influence she wielded in the ancient world had far exceeded the limited physical, cultural, geographical, and political designation of Africa, and her religions are confined today. That's what I was saying. Considering the status of Africa, African women, African men, it would be hard to imagine that she once wielded such power in the ancient world. But history Of course, not the history you just find just like that. You have to do some digging to find out that it was African women, African matriarchs that actually had this kind of power. Now, this is also on page 3. Now, this quote is very, 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 very interesting. Their prophecies, now this is talking about the Sibyls, their prophecies are the oldest in the world. It is through the divine blood of these Sibyl priestesses that the patriarchal kingship of the pharaohs and the Hebrew prophets and the Chaldean priests were born. So let me just point this out right now. It wasn't just Israelite or Hebrew. It was also Hamitic and other non-Israelite Shemitic African groups that these Sibyls were the ancestors of. So I just want to let that know now. We're just not talking about Israel. We're just not talking about Israelites. This was Africa across the board. But I put Hebrew prophets in caps because I'm thinking that those who are of the Israelite way, those are one of the main ones to watch my videos. But I want to let you know, yes, these Sibyls are also ancestors of the Hebrew prophets and the pharaohs and the Chaldean priests. Now, this is on page 50. This is also an interesting one. Before there were race and class wars, the first human factional wars were gender. Now, we always heard, people say, oh, well, gender is just a smoke screen. It's just to keep us divided. But coming to find out, gender is actually the parent of the race wars, of the class wars. It was gender wars before there were even a race and class wars. Let that sink in. And now let me continue to finish reading this, the quote. The first groups to engage in such warfare were the Africans. The first level of power in which control was sought was spiritual, economic, and political. The divine wars began as one between competing clan gods, so that's the spiritual part, and soon escalated beyond what the gods had originally intended. The first apostasy, which is a fall against the divine African mother, appears to have taken place in ancient Egypt. So as you can see, this gender war has an ancient history. It's just not some modern phenomenon that just popped up. No, this gender war is ancient. And what needs to be pointed out, this gender war first took place among the Africans. That's where it originated, in Africa. And what it was, these African patriarchs went to war with these matriarchs who were in rulership for, thousands of years, where they eventually overthrew and usurped her authority. They were resentful and they were jealous of her world influence because, see, you had world rulers consulting her for her wise counsel. But these African patriarchs, they overthrew her. So of course, this gender thing did not start with the Europeans, at least not in Africa. The Europeans came later on. So the Europeans, they were of a different order. They were always, from what I can see, patriarchal leaning. But that was not the case with Africa. But I'll get into when the Europeans and when they came along. But this gender war, it started in Africa, where the African patriarchs overthrew the matriarchal order. And as I said, this gender war is spiritual and it's ancient. It's not a smoke screen like we were led to believe. Let's continue. Okay, so as you said, it started, the first one was in Egypt. So it said the Egypt's patriarchal wars began under Menes. This is a Egyptian pharaoh who ruled from around 3200 to 3000 BC. So he ruled in one of the, the early dynasties. So Egypt's patriarchal wars began under Menes, vying for total control of their ancient mother's empire across Asia Minor, Libya, Troy, and Italy. Like I said, she had influence all over the known world. Okay, and continue. In the holy temples seized by the priests of Amun, that was a patriarchal order, and the Tach, which is divine power of the African matriarchs, had long ago departed. So they long ago ran the matriarchs out. Each temple was so plagued by spiritual and political corruption, commercialization, and internal power struggles and sexual abuse. So when they overturned the matriarchal order, they usurped her and ran her out, ran her off. That's when Africa started its slow but steady decline. That's when moral decay started setting in. Why was that? That was because the masculine, feminine principle was off balance. The feminine principle was no longer there to offset the masculine. So you had too high concentration of masculine energy. And when you have too much of a concentration of one type of energy, things start going awry, things start going wrong. And in this case, it was too much masculine energy. So that's when you had the abuse of power coming in, power struggles, even the sexual, I won't say the word sexual abuse and things like that. That's when Africa started to decline, when the matriarchal order was overthrown. Let's continue. This was on page 52. Now this quote on page 57 through 58. Now check this one out. Furthermore, the patriarchal Hebrew shepherds, whose holy laws and canons do not predate the prophecies of the Sibyls, also revolted against them, the Sibyl matriarchs, and they later came to be known historically as the Semitic Jews of Palestine. They had long ago broken away from the matriarchal orders and following the historic trend began by the patriarchal priests of Horus and the Babylonian Marduk. Jews did away with the worship of their primary black goddess, Anath Yahu, Yahweh. And instead they elevated her minor consort, Jehovah, in her place. Now, don't get thrown off when you see goddess, her consort, Jehovah. Forget about them saying goddess. Let's just think about it this way. When you think of the Creator, now most of you think the Creator, you think the Most High is strictly a masculine deity. Well, I'm here to tell you that that's not true. In order to be a creator, it must be a masculine and a feminine present. Even natural procreation shows this. A man cannot produce a child by himself. A woman cannot produce a child by herself. They both must come together. So what makes you think creation is any different? What makes you think the creator is any different if procreation requires the joining of the masculine and feminine? And I know you have people that will be hard. It's hard for them to accept that the Most High, Yahuwah, the Creator, whatever you call him, God, is feminine as well as masculine. But let me tell you, he is, and I can still say he, because he, as in Adam, think about Adam. Adam was both masculine and feminine until the Most High removed one of his rib or one of his genetics and created a woman. He was made in the image of Yah, the image of God. So he embodied both the masculine and the feminine. Yah, the Creator, is the same. So I just wanted to make that point before continuing. So as it said, they did away with the goddess, the black goddess, Anath Yahu, Yahweh. They did away with Anath Yahu. Could this mean that they did away with the feminine part of the Most High? Of course, they couldn't actually do away with it. That's the Creator. But did they pull away from recognizing and honoring and acknowledging the feminine part of the Most High? And they embrace the masculine part. Is that what it is? As I said, don't let the goddess part throw you. I'm looking beyond this whole goddess thing. And I believe that's what happened with our ancestors, our Israelite ancestors. They once worshiped the Creator as masculine and feminine. But somewhere back in time, they turned their backs. They rejected Yah's feminine part and embraced the masculine. And this is when Israel, along with the other African nations, African civilizations, is this when Israel started undergoing its moral decay. That's just some food for thought. Let's continue. Now, this is on page 36. So as patriarchy held sway around the world, the foreign invaders, such as the Assyrians, the Greeks, the Turks, Romans, and others, and most of these are Indo-European nations, on many occasions would join forces with the Amazons' African patriarchal enemies in order to defeat them. And if you don't know what the Amazon, you heard a lot about the Amazon, the female Amazon warriors. Well, the original Amazons were black women. So you had the Amazons' enemies, which were the African patriarchy. They fought to defeat these Amazon women, and they joined forces with these Indo-European nations to do so. And you see these African patriarchs, since they were more familiar with they having let me just read it. The African patriarchs, having superior knowledge of their ritual magic, therefore knew how to fight successfully against them. See, the African patriarchs had more knowledge of these African women's their magic, their rituals. And since they were in close proximity to these women, they knew how to fight them successfully. And so they joined forces with outsiders. Yes, they did. They joined forces with the outsiders. And as I said earlier, that once they overthrew the matriarchal order, and then now we see that they later joined forces with foreign invaders to help continue to overthrow her. So as you can see, it was the African man's treachery that destroyed Africa. And the reason why the African civilizations underwent such a decline. And this is where we are, why they are the way they are today. Why Africa is the way it is today. They allowed non-African nations to come in. And I believe you can read more about this. I just want to mention this book. I think The Destruction of African Civilization by Chancellor Williams. It may not have the title quite right, but that book also, gives a good illustration on how the African kings and African chiefs, when they allowed these non-African nations, these Indo-European nations to come in, those nations eventually overtook Africa. It didn't happen overnight. But I just want you to say that, yes, it was the African man's betrayal of the African woman, of the matriarchal order, that helped to bring Africa down, that caused her downfall. Now, you have a lot of these Afrocentrists. They'll say that the black woman was never oppressed by the black man never oppressed the black woman. Well, I beg to differ. He was actually her first oppressor. Why? Because when he overthrew her, when he usurped her power, he usurped her authority, he became her first oppressor. He sold her into slavery first. Now you may think, oh, well, the transatlantic slave trade, those were mainly, it was the majority of them were men that were sold into slavery. Let's not forget about the Arab slave trade that started over 1,000 years before the transatlantic slave trade. And if you look that up, the majority of the slaves, the African slaves that were sold, Africans that were sold into slavery, were women. It was the complete reverse of the transatlantic slave trade, whereas a majority male. The Arab slave trade was a majority women, and that slave trade started first. And then you wonder why the black man is the most subjugated man on the planet. His treachery against his own African woman, against his own African mother, cost him dearly. It cost him his kingship. It cost him his high position in civilization. Yes. And I know that is hard to take in. But what's being uncovered, what's being discovered, points to that. And that's what took place. And this book is bringing it out. Okay, let's continue. Now, this is on page 19. It says, oral tradition has it that when men revolted against the authority of mommy, they separated themselves from the divine African mother. Now, let's discuss this mommy, which is short for Mammy Wada. Now, this is just a little quick bit from Wikipedia. Now, this is a description. This is a description of this, Mammy Wada. Mammy Wada, or similar, is a mermaid, water spirit, or a goddess in the folklore of parts of West Africa, Eastern Africa, and Southern Africa. Historically, scholars trace her origin to early encounters between Europeans and West Africans in the 15th century, where Mammy Wada developed from depictions of European mermaids. Mammy Wada subsequently joined native pantheons and deities and spirits in part of Africa. So as you can see, this Mammy Wada, she's actually a goddess. She's a water spirit, and some of you may know, know of it as marine spirits. So in the previous slides, it said, or the book, according to this book, this oral tradition has it that when men revolted against the authority of mommy, they separated themselves from the divine African mother. Now, some of you may be saying, wait a minute, are you saying that because the men revolted against this goddess? Well, the Bible says we're not supposed to be worshiping idols anyway. Stay with me. Okay, this Mammy Wada is a variation of many of the goddesses. Now, this goddess is known as many names: Isis, Asherah, Ashtoreth, Diana. These are different names of pretty much the same goddess. These are variations of the same goddess. Even if it's not the exact same goddess, it's the same spirit. She has the same function. And what it is, this Mammy Wada, she masquerades as the divine feminine. See, this whole divine feminine has been corrupted. And many people think when they hear divine feminine, they think of this goddess. This Mammy Wada goddess is Isis, Asherah. No. The divine feminine is also a part of the Most High. But this Mammy Wada, Isis, Asherah, Ashtoreth, or whatever you call it, whatever you want to call her, this goddess, she took on that divine feminine identity. Just like how Satan says he will exalt his throne above the stars of the Most High, and his desire was to be like the Most High in worship as the Most High. Well, this mommy water seeks the same thing. She wants to be worshiped as the divine feminine. But she is not the divine feminine. She is Satan's counterpart. Now, I know those of you who may be into this mommy water, goddess worship, you may take offense to this. But no, she's just Satan's feminine counterpart. So she's doing just what Satan is doing, where he's trying to be like the Most High. She's trying to be like the feminine part of the Most High, the divine feminine. And I truly believe that she is actually the strange woman that the spirit of wisdom warns the children of Israel about in the book of Proverbs, especially in Proverbs chapter 7. And I believe it uses like an adulterous woman as an allegory of this strange woman, because our ancestors, they were, seduced by a lot of these idols. And I believe a lot of our ancestors were seduced by this goddess. And also in Jeremiah chapter 7 and 44, where it talks about the Queen of Heaven. This is none other than Isis and Asherah, Ashtoreth, Diana, and even Mami Wata being called as Queen of Heaven, because you had the Israelites and you had the women burning incense and baking cakes and making sacrifices to this Queen of Heaven. She wants to be recognized as the Queen of Heaven, as a divine feminine. So I just, thought I would, make a, stop off from doing a commentary on the book, so to speak, and talk a little bit about this Mami Wata, just in case you were confused about, what is this I'm trying to push? Am I trying to push Mami Wata? No, absolutely not. Okay, so let's continue. Now, this is on page 70. So now many books were later plagiarized, revised, or altered and compiled into one holy book known as the Sibylline Oracles, which I had previously mentioned. Those books were used to compile what is known today as the Judeo-Christian Bible, where then credited exclusively to male prophets and other authors listed simply as unknown. So it's likely that there were actually far more women, formal prophetesses, that were mentioned in the Bible. But either the names were changed or they were completely removed. And this didn't start with the Catholic Church. Of course, they had a major hand in it. But this actually started in Africa. It was the African men who was the first ones to alter the ancient writings. Because why? The ancient writings, it started with them. It started in Africa, the Bible. The Bible is not the white man's book as the Afrocentrists want to lead you to believe. It's an African book. It originated in Africa. The oracles, it all originated in Africa. And that's where the alteration, that's where the changing started. Let's continue. So, now these are examples of righteous Sibyls of the Bible. And of course, most of you know of Deborah, but she's mentioned in chapters 4 and 5 of the book of Judges. And then Huldah, she's in 2 Kings chapter 22 and 2 Chronicles chapter 34. And also a couple I'd like to mention too is Anna the prophetess. She was mentioned in Luke, but she prophesied in the temple. Luke chapter 2 verses 36 through 38. And also this one now, most people may not be aware of this, but Isaiah's wife was also a prophetess. And she's mentioned in Isaiah 8 and 3. She's not named though. But I'm sure most of you are familiar with this passage where behold a virgin, but actuality it means it says a young woman, and in Hebrew it's called Alma, and Alma shall conceive. It was in reference to, in Isaiah, it was actually in reference to Isaiah's wife conceiving. And actually, it was a foreshadow of the Messiah. Because when you see the same scripture is mentioned, I think it's in Matthew or one of the scriptures where it mentioned, where before it makes reference to Isaiah, before behold, a virgin or a young maiden, young woman shall conceive. But it was Isaiah's wife, because they had a child, and they had to give it this Latin long name that start with an M. So if you read that passage, you will see it. But actually, their child was a foreshadow of the birth of the Messiah. And if you look up Isaiah's name, his name has the same meaning of the Messiah's name, which is Yah salvation. Yah salvation. That's what Isaiah means. So it would make sense that, his child and his wife's child, would foreshadow the birth of the Messiah. And his wife, as I said, she was a prophetess. So more than likely she was a young prophetess, because he said, behold, a young woman shall conceive. And this makes me wonder, is there more about her in the scriptures, and was it removed? Because yes, his wife was a prophetess. And it wasn't too long ago that I realized this. I said, wait a minute. It talks about Isaiah's wife here, them coming together and conceiving a child. And it calls her a prophetess without naming her, but calls her a prophetess. And if she was a prophetess, I wonder, was there more written about her, and was it removed? Were there more? And were there even more prophetesses mentioned in the scriptures? And if so, were they removed? The words that we read, or some of these words that we read in the scriptures, were they actually spoken or written by prophetesses? But they were erased, and prophets were given the credit. That's something to think about. So let's continue. And so this is on page 4. And so angered, this is the divine mother, angered by the usurpation of her temples and the general corruption wrought throughout the land, the divine African mother prophesied through her Sibyls great woes in the matriarchal cities of Lycia and Smyrna and Ephesus and Corinth and others, where her temples had been seized and corrupted. It is alleged that it was her anger at the seizure of her temples and the corruption that usually followed, why she allowed for Egypt and her many African nations to fall victim to barbaric and foreign invasion and ultimate ruin as divine punishment. And as you know, I had already mentioned that's why Africa, civilizations, African nations greatly declined, and that can't be denied. What happened for these African nations to decline the way that they did? And it was something spiritual. Now let's continue. This is on page 15. Since their unauthorized acquisition of her divine authority, there has been little peace in the world, because they have demonized the voice of her prophetesses and continued to enslave and oppress her prophets and people. And there has been no divine prophecy. So now this was in reference to the Western powers that came, because of course, the revolt started with the African men, and they joined forces with a lot of these Indo-European nations. But of course, it was the European nations that perfected this oppression. So that's why it says oppress her prophets and people. So the Africans as a whole are being oppressed. So, but you wonder, okay, many of these civilizations, you have Egypt and other civilizations, many, especially of you who are of the Israelite way. So with these civilizations, they worship idols. They were pagan. So why would Yah bring judgment for the overthrowing of any kind of order among these nations? But you can't be ignored that even in paganism, these civilizations thrived. And what caused them to start declining? I'm going to explain why. See, you have to be aware that there is also something called a universal law and natural law. Yes, Israel made a covenant with the Most High. Israel had a covenant with the Most High, and Israel suffered punishment. She suffered the consequences when she went against the covenant of the Most High. She didn't keep up her end of the covenant. So yes, that's what, Israel has to deal with. But there's also a universal order that people as a whole must go by. And when they go against that universal order, there are consequences for that. So yes, this can mean pagan nations too. The law, the commandments, the statutes, Yah established for Israel, that was Israel. But there's also a universal law, a natural order, and also, and when you go against that natural order, things start going wrong. Because the earth, you look at the earth is actually feminine. Mother Earth, Mother Nature. It's called Mother Earth and Mother Nature for a reason. And a lot of times when you go against the laws of nature, when you go against universal laws, things start going wrong. So yes, this goes for pagans too. And under this matriarchal order, it was seen that these civilizations, it was in sync. This matriarchal order was in sync with the universal law. So, to a certain degree, it was in sync with the natural order. It was in sync, with the Mother Earth and nature. So that would explain why these pagan civilizations still thrived. But when the masculine and feminine was thrown, out of balance, off balance, it got out of order, out of sync with the universal order, universal law, with the natural order, with the natural law. And that's when things started going wrong. Okay, let's continue. Now, this is on page 36. Now, we're going to go into the discussion of Apostle Paul. On page 36, it was also at Ephesus and Corinth where the converted Jew turned Christian Paul was made a saint by the Roman Catholic Church for helping to orchestrate the destruction of much of the ancient black matriarchal temples of Black Diana and forcing Christianity upon its citizens. So if you watch my previous video, I had said this author, she does not speak highly of Paul. Because see, this author is coming from a more of a pro-Mami Wada perspective. And she see Paul as sort of this misogynist who are against the goddesses, against the matriarchal order. She see Paul as those patriarchs who overthrew the matriarchal order. So that's what she see Paul as. So that's a quote. But I want to come with a different narrative, a different perspective regarding Paul. Because contrary to what people have been led to believe, Paul was not a misogynist. If you do, research, and it looks more and more like he was not a misogynist. Now, you may read some of his passages where it says, well, the women are to keep silent. But let me explain. What you see on the screen here is a YouTuber by the name of the Gates of Holder. You can check out their channel. And they actually did a video titled, "Are those really the words of Paul or the Catholic Church?" And it says, are those really the words of Paul or the Catholic Church? Claims have been made that the Apostle Paul was a misogynist. And in this video, and I recommend that you check it out, they call into serious question of whether or not these words were of Paul, because they show discrepancies of where Paul actually had women playing, in major roles in the assembly. Now, I can't remember for sure if this video mentioned these scriptures, but I would like to mention these scriptures myself. And one of it is in Philippians 4:3. We had with women who actually labored beside Paul in the good news or the gospel. He recognized women by name who served as, deaconess and had prominent roles in the assembly, such as Phoebe. He said, Phoebe, our sister. You can find this in Romans 16:1, verses 1 through 2. Several times he mentions Priscilla, who was the wife of Aquila. Several times he mentions her. So this would contradict the women keeping silent passages. There appears to be some serious discrepancies with Paul's letters. And that raises suspicion that his letters have been tampered with. Because women, even his own letters shows that women played very active roles in the assemblies. Because how could she keep quiet if she had played a prominent role in the assembly? How should she keep quiet? And what people are starting to suspect, what researchers are starting to suspect is, during the early days of the Messianic movement, women had more prominent roles. But as you know, these churches, these assemblies were in Asia Minor, which was under Greek rule and Greco-Roman rule. And the Greek culture was very misogynistic. So when these early apostles, these original apostles, when they left the scene, that's when you had these church fathers come in, and it was them who subjugated the women. So perhaps it was them who tampered with Paul's letters and made it say things that Paul didn't actually say. It was their words. And I also want to recommend another YouTuber video by Truth Unedited. Now he's doing a series called Testing Christianity, and this is part 8. And in part 8, he talks about the early church fathers who created Christianity. They came along after the original apostles left the scene. Now, let me tell you right now, he's not going to talk about the church fathers, being misogynistic. No. That's not what he's discussing in this video. I'm just recommending this video because it talks about how the early church fathers, how they shaped Christianity to what it is today. Because what, Peter, Apostle Paul, what they had, and what Peter knows his and disciples had under Yeshua is what we see now as Christianity is different. And it was in these early church fathers, which were Greek for the most part, or Greco-Roman, it was them who influenced and shaped what we know today as Christianity. So more than likely, it was these early church fathers who tampered with Paul's writings to make him say things, that he didn't actually say. And as I said, the Greek culture was very misogynistic. All you have to do is check out some of Aristotle, which he was a well-known Greek philosopher. And his views towards women were very misogynistic, and it reflected the Greek, the Greek culture's, views towards towards women. So I just wanted to say that, but yes, Paul has the name of being a woman hater, of being a misogynist, but when you do your research, that is seriously called into question. So let's continue. I don't have too many more slides. I know we're about to go into the hour mark, but just hang with me just a little bit more, a little bit longer. Okay, so this is on page 94. It says the early church fathers unashamedly consulted the Pythia, the Sibyls, for prophetic insight and military and strategic direction when it was convenient for them. Once they were done, they wasted no time in blaming them and their totems, like the totem pole, I guess, as a center of spiritual corruption, social and moral decay, sexual promiscuity, and evil in Europe. Now, as I said earlier, these weren't just Israelite And these weren't just righteous Sibyls that I'm talking about here. This writer, she clumps them all together. She clumps the Israelite Sibyls with the non-Israelite Sibyls. You had Hamites, you had non-Israelite Shemites, you had Sibyls who practiced dark arts and all other kind of wicked practices, and yet you also had the righteous Sibyls. But you had these now, in this one, she's talking about, I think that's mainly the Greco-Roman powers. They consulted, and then when Europe was becoming more Christian, they consulted these Sibyls, and they used them for their magical powers, because see, even in the wickedness, a lot of those of Africans, they had a stronger spiritual connections that the Europeans didn't have, and so they know they needed them to a point for spiritual matters. But when they used them for what they needed them for, then they just threw them under the bus. And this is what the scripture was talking about. These world-ruling powers, which were becoming more Christian, so they were coming against these dark arts. They're coming against these magical, these magical rituals and condemning it as evil. But at the same time, they used them, they consulted them. Just like how they speak against maybe astrology, like today, they speak against astrology. They call it demonic. They call it wicked. They tell those that they want to keep subjugated not to use it. But in the shadows, in the darkest of the nights, they are practicing it. And that's how they keep the upper hand. And if the Most High doesn't change my mind, I'll be doing a video on, astrology. Now, I don't know much about astrology, so that's not my area of expertise, but I feel led to do a video addressing astrology, since I mentioned it when I was reading this quote. Okay, so next page. Now this is on 48. It says the Sibyls were known to, sorry for the typo, to effect miraculous cures credited to today's Judeo-Christian tradition exclusively to Christ. However, it was originally the Sibyls prior to Christ who were hailed for giving sight to the blind, curing lameness, epileptics, deaf mutes, and lepers. They were said to cast out demons and even to raise up the dead. Now, I said this earlier, that the Sibyls, yes, they were known to perform miracles, even before the birth of the Messiah. So I just thought, to share the quote where the book actually says that. So there were, similarities between, the Sibyls and the Messianic and the Messiah. Now, this is on page 12 now. This is also an interesting one, where it connects the Sibyls to, the African Americans and the descendants of slaves. Mr. Hyatt traveled across the mainly southern United States, interviewing hundreds of ex-enslaved African priestesses and priests and their descendants. The more than 1,600 women and men practitioners interviewed by Mr. Hyatt, anxious to help document and preserve their important religious culture, volunteered to contribute to this historic archival study. During the course of their interviews, nearly all of the women and an impressive number of the men declared with the strongest conviction that they were indeed true prophets, prophetesses, and doctors. So, you see, even our ancestors acknowledged that they were descendants of prophets, prophetesses, and doctors, priestesses. And also it would mean that you had descendants of the Sibyls as well. So it all comes together, we being the descendants of the children of Israel, and many of them were prophets and prophetesses, and even priests. And then there's another similar one on page 13. Let's continue on page 13. However, a closer examination might reveal that many in the diaspora may very well have been descendants of the Sibyls, whose history has been lost, stolen, deliberately, culturally disguised, obscured, and Europeanized beyond recognition in the contemporary faiths of today. However, with an increasing number of African Americans finding no solace in today's scandal-ridden, unfulfilling Western faiths, desire to learn the true history of their ancient ancestral religions that once dominated the world, therefore, the time is nigh that their story be told. So as you can see, things are starting to come out. And it's starting to show that, yes, a lot of us are the descendants of the Sibyls, or the descendants of the Israelite prophets and prophetesses. So it's all coming together. Now this is the last part of this message that I'm sharing with you today. Now it says on page I guess that'll be 9, lowercase 9. So this is in the forward section of the book. Many Black women are born not knowing that their suffering stems from their disconnection with the ancient rights and spiritual duty to continue the work of their ancient mothers. The suppression of the ancient history of the African matriarch and their contributions to world religion, magic, spirituality, and prophecy is one of the greatest cover-ups and divine tragedy. That's a word in, I guess this would mean, I'm sorry I didn't look it up, but I'm thinking it means tragedies in human history. So let's unpack this. As you can see, yes, we have been disconnected from our culture. And also, we come to find out we have been disconnected from the divine feminine. And as I explained, the divine feminine, no, it should not be credited to a goddess. The divine feminine is a part of the Most High. And due to reprogramming and even enslavement and oppression, Black women, Black men, Israel, even Africa, because this is not just about Israel. This is about Africans across the board. There are times when I'm specifically talking about Israel, and there are times when I'm talking about Africans as a whole. But she has been disconnected with the divine feminine, and she must reconnect to the divine feminine for her sake and for the sake of her own people. But speaking of this divine feminine, as I said, it is actually a part of the Most High. In Proverbs, when it talks about the spirit of wisdom, the spirit of wisdom was described as feminine, a female. Wisdom came in representation of the divine feminine. And the great deception came about with the teaching that the Most High is strictly masculine. That's where the great deception comes in. Because when women see that this, Judeo-Christianity and other Abrahamic religions that subjugate women, they see that, and since it's been taught that the Most High of the Bible is strictly masculine, they see that their only alternative is this goddess worship, this worship of Isis, this worship of Mami Wada, this worship of Black Diana, Ashura, whatever name they want to call her. They see this as their only alternative. And so many women and a lot of Black women are going this route into this goddess worship, into this, this type of goddess worship is very sensual. It influences women to embrace their, sexual side, which of course, yeah, we are, sexual creatures too, but they encourage it in a more way, because you see this spirit heavy in the showbiz with the women in Hollywood, in the I won't even name, but the female celebrities that I'm talking about. This goddess worship, they push this goddess worship, this overly sexualization, this being provocative and dressing provocative and things like that. And that's a part of the deception. Because when you don't know that the Most High is also feminine, and you see where these Abrahamic religions are subjugating the women, you say, okay, I just can't accept the subjugation of women. What is my alternative? You will see this goddess worship as your alternative. But I'm here to tell you, no. The Most High is all so feminine. And a lot of people are going to push back against that. Because see, huge measures have been taken to erase the feminine principle of the Most High. Many huge measures have been taken. And it's for a reason. They want to erase that part of the Most High, but they can't do it. And that's why you're seeing this divine shift taking place. That's because the divine feminine is returning. She, in a way, retreated, but she's making her return because we are a new age is dawning. So don't be surprised when you see more things coming out, when you see more things that were hidden be uncovered, when you discover that yes, women played a bigger role in the scriptures than we were led to believe. Get ready. Things are, because see, this is an age of knowing. This is an age of exposure. More things are going to come out. More is going to come out. But I would caution you to be careful, when you read this book, because although this book has great information, it pushes that mommy water worship. It pushes that goddess worship. And it doesn't speak too highly of the scriptures. Yet it says that many the Sibyls, contributed to some of the scripture, but yet it said that they changed it, they tampered with it. And I'm not saying that some of it wasn't changed, it wasn't tampered with. So it's just like how like I said earlier, how Afrocentrist says the Bible is a white man book. Do away with the Bible. Pick up the Book of the Dead because the Bible was a plagiarized, Book of the Dead. That's what they try to say. Afrocentrists try to say. You have to be careful. You have to be careful with those type of arguments. When you read those type of works, those type of books, you have to read it with your spiritual filters on, so you can retain the good. You can pick out the gems and filter out the bad. Now, this is the last slide. Now I just want to close out with this. Now this is the verse. This is a chapter, Jeremiah chapter 30, verse 17. Now these are that verse from 3 different translations. I just want to show you something. This verse talks about Jerusalem, Zion, the unwanted city. Now this is how it reads in the King James Version, the KJV. For I will restore health unto thee, and I will heal thee of thy wounds, doth saith Yahuwah, or the Lord. Because they call thee an outcast, saying, this is Zion, whom no man seeketh after. Now, I underline outcast and no man seeketh after for a reason. Now, I just read the King James Version. Now, this is about Jerusalem, the city. Now, I want you, instead of reading this as Jerusalem, insert the black woman, the Israelite woman, in place of Jerusalem. And let's see how it reads. For I will restore health unto thee, and I will heal thee of thy wounds. Thus saith Yah, because they called thee an outcast, saying, this is Zion, whom no man seeketh after. Let's read the Living Bible translation. I will give you back your health again and heal your wounds. Now you are called the outcast, and Jerusalem, the place nobody wants. Okay, let's read this second translation. I forgot what translation this is. I'm sorry, I left off that translation. But anyway, this is another translation. For I will heal you. I will heal you where you have been hurt, says Yah, because they have said that you are not wanted. They have said it is Zion, no one cares for her. How many have heard this being said in reference to black women, in reference to Israelite women, that she's the least desired woman? Nobody wants her. Not even her own men wants her. Nobody cares for her. She's the least married woman because she's not wanted. She's the least desirable of all other quote unquote races of women. Jerusalem, the black woman, the Israelite woman, personifies Jerusalem, the city. And now, what's below these verses, this was actually a documentary this is on the Stephen Graham Project's channel, and it's titled, Where is Jerusalem, City of David? And it's several years old, but it is a great documentary because this is where Stephen Graham, he interviews an elder by the name of Hashua. He has a community, Elder Hashua. He actually has a community in, Israel. And he is, and Stephen Graham was interviewing him. Now, Elder Hashua in his, earlier days, he would travel to Israel, on occasions. And he would go to the city that they told him was Jerusalem. And he would look about and said, this just doesn't quite fit with how the city of David, how Jerusalem is described in the scriptures. And later on, he discovered that the Jerusalem that they were saying was the true Jerusalem was not the true Jerusalem. And anyway, it was the true Jerusalem was actually discovered. And then he saw where the true Jerusalem, where it fit exactly with how the geographical description of that place fits exactly the way it's described in the Bible. I would encourage you to check out this documentary. And the way it's described in the Bible fits perfectly with this verse because they show the footage of the so-called true Jerusalem, and it was completely deserted. It was completely desolate. There were no tours around, no hustling and bustling, whereas the Jerusalem that he were originally told was the true Jerusalem. It was hustling, bustling, cars, tourists all over the place. So it fits, the true Jerusalem fits perfectly with this verse. It was an outcast. No man seeketh after. The place nobody wants. You are not wanted. No one cares for her. And as I read this, I said, you know what? This describes the black woman as being undesired and no one seeketh after. And that shows how the world is out of sync with the divine feminine. And the black woman, being the most melanated woman, being the original woman, she is the epitome, the earthly, epitome of the divine feminine. And if the world is out of sync with the divine feminine, if they're out of sync with the divine mother, how much more so would they be out of sync with the earthly epitome of the divine feminine? So I thought I would close that out. So this is an actual parallel to those, my first message where I talk about those experience in their woke journey. So this, as far as women, black women, Israelite women, this parallels the woke journey, where you have the black people are inferior, the black people are the outcasts, and then you find out our greatness, where we descended from, our place with the Most High, our standing with the Most High. And this parallels, with the women, our place, our history, our standing with the Most High. So I thought, it's a great way to close out this video, close out this message. And this message, it was long, but it was needed. So yes, this is a very extended commentary of this book. Now I know I strayed away from the book because I wanted to elaborate on it. But I just hope that this commentary, this message has given you a lot to think about, a lot to meditate on, a lot to pray about. And now you can read this book with your spiritual eyes, because so many women have fallen prey to that goddess worship because they were unaware that the Most High is feminine too. They think their only alternative is goddess worship. I'm here to say it's not. It's not. Because you'll still be under deception. You go into goddess worship, you're still under deception. But I'm here to say the Most High Creator, He's a father and he's a mother. He's a father and she's a mother. So I hope you've been blessed by this commentary and this word. So I'm going to be closing this video out. And if you can please like and share, subscribe, and leave a comment. Be blessed.